Hi, so in today's video, let's talk about off-grid computing. The idea of off-grid computing is to be able to take advantage of productivity while not having to carry all the baggage along with the innovations that are required to enable that capability. High level, we have applications that can work off the grid, and we have computing capabilities that can work off the grid. So first, let's talk about the driving principles behind it. Anything you do, or anything you choose to do, or anything you embark upon, when it is involving any innovation, that innovation in itself has pros and cons associated with it. So anything you decide to do, there's pros and cons. There's never any perfect direction that you can take. Anything you do has a cost. So for example, I'll have another video on the fallacy of innovation, but I'll just give you a quick example here. If we look at the electric horse became what is known as an automobile. And I'll just be very quick with this. I'll cover this in another video, but high level, we'll just do one quick argument for the fallacy of innovation. Right now, we're actually trying to fundraise a whole lot of money. We're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars just to upkeep this innovation. So are we in the right direction? Is there other ways that we can transport things, that we can traverse ourselves to get from one place to another? So for the past 100 years, we've been heavily focused on this electric horse that requires you to pave away half of the world away just to make this work. And that focus could have been focused in other areas. You could have been looking in other directions. So that is the fallacy of innovation. Well, there's many aspects to it. We'll get that into another video. But that is a driving principle for off-grid computing. Another driving principle for off-grid computing is the carbon cloud. At least I call that the carbon cloud, which is cloud computing. If you look at cloud computing, you'll notice that we have data centers that have to be replicated throughout the world, and those data centers have to be heavily invested into failover capabilities. You need to have the ability to have 24/7 upkeep. You have to have metal servers available that work and operate, and if one goes down, you have to quickly be able to replace it. You need backup servers, you need backup power. It's very, very, very costly. And if we were to look at that as a carbon footprint, we would realize that that is probably one of the heaviest carbon footprints out there. So that's another driving principle behind this concept of off-grid computing. So let's look at some guiding principles for enabling off-grid computing. So what are some of the capabilities that are a high priority to make this work? Well, first of all, you need to have a solution that has tools that you can access. And usually when you access tools in a computing facility, you're accessing these tools by accessing into a server or accessing into a computational data center. So the idea with an off-grid computing solution is to be able to take all of those necessities that are dependencies that need to run off of a cloud or off of a metal server or many metal servers, which is usually the case with these applications these days, is they actually are operating within a variety of servers, to be able to take all of that and consolidate it into a singleton application that can run off grid, or having a bed of applications working together that all work off grid in the same context. Okay, so that sounds complicated, but that's a guiding principle. So the guiding principle is really just to be able to access the tools that are in the process of computing. Another aspect of another driving principle is to be able to access the data. And usually what we've done is we've started off with a very articulate, very well-defined database, and we embed our data in that, and we expect that this database will manage the data for us. Well, is there a way that we can take all that and encapsulate that as well into the same application bed that is off-grid? So that is another driving principle. And one more driving principle is the processes themselves and the cybersecurity around those processes. So let's talk about cybersecurity. So we do get carried away with cybersecurity, which is another fallacy of innovation. Why do we have these innovations if if we have to also carry additional investment on the side that requires cybersecurity? These are the hidden costs, right? Well, first, let's try to understand cybersecurity. A majority of any hacks or majority of anything that becomes a risk into applications is the result of social engineering. What this means is people who are hacking or systems that are hacking other systems are usually triggered by some information gathered through social engineering. So it's actually the social engineering that enables a cybersecurity concern, not so much a hole in a program. Although there are holes in programs that we do need to consider, but the majority of cybersecurity hacks are through social engineering. You won't hear about this because when there is a hack that has been instigated by social engineering, it is to the embarrassment of a person who has given up their information that we want to protect. So we usually don't report any social engineering hacks. We rather just kind of confuse the situation to just suggest it's just a general cybersecurity hack, and we leave it up to the consumer of this information to come up to their own conclusions of how this cybersecurity hack occurred. But it's kind of funny because it is actually social engineering that is the majority of these hacks. The idea here is you have to have very strong policies upon which you protect a system through being aware of social engineering attacks, right? So the idea here is if you have good policies, then that protects your systems. So it's not so much the systems that you have to highly invest in to highly protect, it's more so just coming up with processes and policies for people to follow to make sure these systems are protected. If you have an application running off grid, it's very unlikely that that can be actually hacked. The reason why is the process has already been initiated, and once the process is initiated, it has allocated all its resources to follow through with some logic. And while that process has been kicked off, it's very unlikely that that can be hijacked. So that's another aspect of cybersecurity you need to consider, which is that cybersecurity attacks are generally a trigger of a process that is hijacked, or the access of a process that has been hijacked, and that access has triggered something that is not representing the right player. So when you're on an off-grid computing solution, you're very unlikely to get cybersecurity attacks because you're off-grid. It's very unlikely to have a hijack once you have a process running off-grid. Because you're off-grid, nobody can access what you're doing, only you can access this. So this is with respect to running tools and operations and capabilities off-grid that you have initiated yourself. And when you initiate yourself, you actually would access an on-grid solution. You would pull all the needed resources to be able to operate and prepare that capability, and then you would run that capability off-grid, and then the result of that operation off-grid, you can then connect back on-grid to be able to fulfill the needs of any other processes required of the output of your off-grid computing process. So let's talk about an implementation really quick, and then with that discussion, I'll try to elaborate what I just said, if that was a bit complicated. So we have a solution, Synapse Chain, which I've talked about in other videos. This entire solution has been designed to operate off-grid. So what that means is so in this case, in this rendition, this is just an e-commerce solution, an end-to-end e-commerce solution. There's no plugins, there's no connections to a bed of microservices that are connecting to a whole bunch of servers out there in the cloud. It is a self-sustained application that can run off the grid. That's how this has been designed. Now, to be able to integrate this with other people, you might think, well, if I need to integrate with other people, if I'm creating an order and I need to submit an order, or I need to allow somebody else to submit an order and I need to take the result of that order creation, well, how does that work? Because if I'm off grid, I'm not connected to anybody else. Well, the way this has been designed is that you can actually connect on grid to send a result that can connect to a server, like a centralized server that can then be consumed by multiple players. Or you can actually take the result, the input or the output of this application, and you can actually send it to somebody yourself. You can send the entire application yourself, and you can send that. You can send it as a block. So it's been designed to be blockchain friendly, but it's been designed to be sent to somebody else, and that handshake, then you can handshake that off to somebody else, and then they have the result of that process or that application. And then from there, they can operate off grid, and then when they're complete, they can send it back to you. And that exchange can occur in multiple ways. It can occur on an email, it can occur just on one of these you can just save this entire application. This entire suite of capabilities can be saved in a little USB drive. You can just share that with somebody. You don't need to connect to the internet. You don't need to connect to the grid. So this saves, this actually is the lightest footprint solution that you could see, at least for now. And so I'm hoping more people will get into this and build more of these off-grid computing applications. So the idea here, I'll go through this in another video, but the idea here is this little Energizer ARC3, I can run my application off of a laptop. I can plug this in, but I actually have a Bluetti, and I can actually plug this monster computer into a Bluetti. It can operate through a Bluetti, but I'd rather just run through a laptop. I can run my laptop off this Energizer 3, or at least power my laptop and then run my laptop independently without having to be even connected to, obviously, to an Energizer. But the idea here is, this is why I have this placed here for you to see, is I have an EcoFlow, I have a Bluetti, and I have an Energizer ARC3. Each of those have a phosphate-friendly battery, and I have solar panels that connect to these batteries, and the solar panels will pump some power into these batteries, and then I can run all my applications off grid. Also, what is nice is I can develop my applications. So all the development processes can also be run off grid. So the development processes, the operation of the applications, everything is all off grid. So I'll go through this through other videos, and it'll have to be educational so that I get across this idea, so I can inspire other people to start thinking about the direction of innovation and the fallacy of innovation, and to realize there's a lot of costs to any direction we go. We have to be very aware of that. And so if we're aware of that, and we understand that there is a need for off-grid computing, then more people will develop these types of solutions and will be quite carbon friendly. So that leads us into the future outlook of off-grid computing. So first of all, one of the outlooks for off-grid computing might be to prepare for what might be coming as attacks. There might be attacks of using your applications in the cloud. For now, it's all free for all, and it's like the Wild West of computing. Anybody can run anything in the cloud, and it's really, really cost effective. This is to get more people in the cloud, get people more dependent on the cloud. Eventually, the costs are going to go up because it's very expensive to run data centers. But also on top of that, let's say we caught up to understanding the carbon footprint of running these data centers. Well, there very well might be a tax associated with any computational access to these data centers, and you might need to pay that tax. So to prepare yourself, to alleviate yourself from that carbon tax or the carbon cloud tax, would be to develop these solutions that are off-grid. Another future outlook very well might be the fact that we might have passed peak oil. So let's say there is only a certain amount of oil in the ground, and let's just say that we've pulled most of that oil out of the ground. There might be oil somewhere, but let's just say most of it is pulled out of the ground. Once we pass peak oil, we very well might have less oil to be able to run these applications or run these data centers or run these computational capabilities. And we love computing, so how do we keep it alive? Now, what about these other alternative energy sources, etc.? Well, those actually are very effective, but you still need to depend on oil somewhat because not everything can be powered at this point from all these alternative energy sources. So if we do pass peak oil, we very well might hit the wall on being able to take advantage of all this computation. The other aspect of it is accessing, processing, and supplying data. So this is a huge driver in why our innovations today are so complicated and highly tied to the baggage associated with high carbon footprint. It is the loose coupling of an application to the data that application needs to be able to compute. So the idea here then is, how do we come up with an off-grid solution where we have access to the data and we can easily access the data while we're computing off-grid?